My whole life, I've heard people say we're living in the greatest time in history. And it's true. We have more technology, more access to people around the world. The world has gotten smaller because of our communication and everything else. In many, many ways, it is the greatest time in history. But here's what I'm going to submit right now. As I'm recording this podcast, the beginning of 2025, this is truly the greatest time in history. It's so great that when you look forward 50 years from now, people in the year 2050, 2060, 70, 80 are going to look back and say, man, I wish I could have been alive in 2025. And here's the coolest part. You and I, we can actually say it. We are alive at the greatest time in history. So here's the big question. How do everyday people like us who didn't grow up wealthy and were not taught how to be wealthy in school, how are we supposed to learn to think, invest, and grow wealth like the top 1% without compromising our ethics and our values? My name is Jeremy Whaley. That was my big question. This podcast will give you the answers. You're listening to Think Rich Radio. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Think Rich Radio. I'm your host, Jeremy Whaley, and it's great to have you joining me for a brand new series. I'm going to actually do a series here. I think it's going to be about 10 parts. It might be more. I have no idea. We're just going to jump in and see how far it goes. But I'm calling this series The Age of Regenesis, The Age of Regenesis. And this is going to set the tone for all of the year. Is leading up to a book that I have coming out called The Age of Regenesis and a conference that we're going to be doing, a summit at the kind of the end of the spring here called the Regenesis Summit. So all of this is working together because, as I said in the intro, this is the greatest time in history to be alive. And you and I get to experience it. We get to live through it. So it's so cool. And I'm looking forward to sharing these ideas with you. I think it's going to rock your world. Before we get there, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Trade Maestro. Trade Maestro makes everything possible for us. Check us out over at TradeMaestro.com. If you want to learn how to trade stocks, if you want to learn how to trade options, cryptocurrency, figure out what's going on with DeFi and all this new stuff that's happening in the world, TradeMaestro.com is here to help navigate you. Listen, it doesn't have to be hard. It does not have to be hard. Trading can be easy. It can be easy as red and green if you know what you're looking at. And of course, over at TradeMaestro.com, we will teach you all of the ins and outs of the financial markets. So check us out over at TradeMaestro.com. The Age of Regenesis, the greatest time to be alive in world history, I'm telling you. There's some backstory here. Let me kind of fill it in for you. Back in 2020, right in the midst of COVID, around April or May of that year, we did a summit called the Calm in the Storm Summit. And we did 2 of these. Maybe we did 3 of them. I can't remember now. But we hosted the Calm in the Storm Summit, and we did it for one reason. That was to help people stay grounded and realize that the world wasn't really coming to an end. We were just going through some cycles, and I laid out several social cycles that were happening. And these are cycles that I've been tracking now for the better part of 2 decades. Laid out in a book called The Fourth Turning. They're social cycles that move through about 80-year windows. And at that time, I knew we were right in the middle of it. We were reaching the climax, and I talked about that in the Calm in the Storm Summit, and I've kind of followed these themes for several years now. Well, fast forward, and we got through the election cycle of 2024. It was November 2024, if you remember. Trump won his second term, and I was kind of reflecting on it and looking at some of his rhetoric, and I said, my goodness, we're there. This is it. This is the end of the societal winter. We are setting up for the societal spring, and oh my goodness, this is an age of regenesis. And that was where I first coined this term, the age of regenesis, and it really was stimulated by a combination of things, which we'll talk about here in this episode, but really the biggest one being Trump's second term. And I want you to know it's not about politics. It's not about Republican, Democrat. I don't even consider myself a Republican. I have been for probably pushing 20 years now. I've strongly identified as a libertarian, very small government, very much about, independence and, just kind of the opposite of what Republicans and Democrats both stand for. So it's not about political party. What it is about is it's about social cycles. And that's what we're going to talk about in this episode is the big picture, the social cycles. And I want you to understand what Trump represents is he marks the beginning. He marks the beginning of this transition from a societal winter into a societal spring. And what it means for us is it's a 4 to 6 year window that I'm calling the Age of Regenesis. And it's a very, very small window where we are at an opportunity. It's kind of a precipice in history, if you will, where we can come in and plant the seeds that are going to grow into the institutions for the next 60, 80, 100 years of history. And so we're literally at the beginning of this, and you and I have this incredible opportunity. I mean, an opportunity that hasn't existed since the 1940s. And before that, it was in the 1870s, when we were in a similar social cycle. And so you and I get to experience this, and it really is incredible. Now, as just some evidence that we're at this turning point, all you have to do is look at the rhetoric, look at the way that Trump talks and the divisiveness between Trump and not just the opposing Democrat Party, but even within the Republican Party itself. There's a lot of divisiveness because what we're seeing playing out in front of us is this social cycle, this theme of old institutions dying. In this case, it's the Republican Party is dying. And in this case, the Democrat Party is dying. But when you look at where we're going and you look at the rhetoric and the policies that Trump is instituting, he's saying things like the new golden age. He's dropping hints that whether he knows it or not, he is aligning 100% with the cycles of society and this whole social or societal cycle that's moving into a spring, a new golden age. It's incredible that he would choose that language pattern. He's talking about we're going to become the leaders of cryptocurrency. And you're starting to see that with some of his policies where they're taking on the old institutions and they're saying, we are instituting DeFi, we're instituting crypto. Now that might seem scary to some of you, but when you step back and you understand where we are in the social cycle, you realize, oh my goodness, it's playing out before our eyes. And it actually wouldn't even matter who that leader was. It just so happens that Trump is the guy for this time in history. He's the one who happens to be the leader. But socially speaking, this was going to happen. If we look at some more policies, we're seeing that the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, they're tearing down government waste. And as a whole, the entire narrative and the policy is all about America first. This is literally destroying the last 80 years of politics in America. And it's incredible to watch. It's scary for some because they don't know what to think. It's like, oh, we've never seen that before. But it's exciting because what we really see happening is a social cycle is repeating. The old is dying and the new is coming to life. So why regenesis? Regenesis is a word that I've chosen. It's a noun that means renewal or a new birth. Renewal or new birth. And there's not a better word to describe the season or this age that we're getting into, the age of regenesis. Now, how does that connect with this whole idea of Think Rich Radio? Well, the whole idea of Think Rich Radio is how is it that the top 1% think that's different than the poor and the middle class? And the answer to that is none better than they see the opportunity of a regenesis age and they say, we're going to jump on that. We're going to take advantage of that. So there's really not a better topic than this whole age of regenesis in terms of what our audience is and what our premise for this podcast is. To think rich is actually to look at the age of regenesis and say, wow, that is the opportunity. That's the opportunity that the top 1% is going to see. They're going to take it. And the cool thing is we also have the opportunity to take that opportunity, this opportunity. So what is this opportunity that I'm talking about? Well, let me give you a little background here. The first concept, the key concept came from a book called The Fourth Turning. It was written by a guy named William Strauss and his partner, Neil Howe. William Strauss has passed away since then. Neil Howe is still around, and he actually wrote an update to it just a couple of years ago. And the name of that book is called The Fourth Turning is Here. So you can go reference those on Amazon. But I'll give you the key idea here. The key idea is that society goes through seasons. just like nature goes through seasons. And so in nature, we have spring, summer, fall, and winter. And in the spring, everything is planted and we start growing new life. In the summer, we work the field. It gets hard and toilsome. Then you get to the fall, and that's the great harvest. And then as you move through the harvest season, we get into winter. And during the winter, everything dies off. And as everything dies off, what happens? It makes room for new life. Well, society goes through these same cycles, and Strauss and Howe identified this in their book, The Fourth Turning. They referred to this societal winter as the fourth turning. It's that turn that happens as we're going through these societal cycles, or seasons, if you will. And what they identified is it's roughly an 80-year cycle. And so each one of these seasons takes up about 20 years in that cycle. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, but typically on average it's 20 years. And if you look at all four of them together, they refer to it as a seculum, and that creates the 80-year cycle. So if we were to go back, the previous societal winter, the previous fourth turning, happened with the catalyst event. The beginning of the cycle started with the 1929 stock market crash, and that got us into the Great Depression. And then the climax event that really finalized tearing down all the old structures and beginning the new ones was World War II. And of course, that was a multi-year event that many people have actually looked back upon and said that was the greatest thing that happened because it pulled society together. There was an existential threat where everybody was saying, oh no, we have to fight off Hitler. We have to fight off the Germans. We have to win this war. Failure is not an option. Well, if you fast forward, what happened right after that? We got into an age of regenesis. Right in the middle of the war, towards the end of the war, towards the beginning of spring, we started seeing all these new seeds that were getting planted. This is when penicillin came on the market. It's when the health industry as we know it today was starting to be born. It's when higher education as we know it today was really getting its foothold. It's when banking as we know it today was really getting its foothold. Some of those seeds had been planted a couple of decades before in the form of the formation of the Federal Reserve, but banking as we know it really took shape after 1935, 1936, when Roosevelt revalued the currency. And then you look just right after the war, we had the Bretton Woods Agreement, which established the US dollar as the international world standard. And all the banking for the 20th century basically went back to that 10-year window when all these seeds were being planted. It was a regenesis period. And I could go through industry and institution after institution and articulate how the last 80 years was set up in that small window of time in the 1940s as we were transitioning from societal winter into societal spring. Now, if you go back to the cycle before World War II, the previous societal winter or the previous fourth turning was moving through the Civil War period. And the Civil War was the climax event. We come out of that, and what do we get into? We got into the Gilded Era, the age of industrialization. We got into this time period when everything was expanding. And if you look back at that time, even right now, Donald Trump and his team have been looking back at that time and saying, look, we didn't even have an IRS back then. And look how much prosperity we had. We didn't have income taxes. Look how much prosperity there was during that little window of time. And that window of time set us up for the Roaring 20s, and it set us up for all this incredible early turn of the century growth that we had in the United States. That all came out of a societal winter, an age of regenesis that took place right at the end of the Civil War, right at the beginning of what we would call the age of industry, and moving into that whole era, that Gilded Era, that turn of the century, and all of that season. If you go back to the previous turning before that, the previous winter was the Revolutionary War. And what was happening? It was down with the old institution, the monarchy. We were tearing down the monarchy. We were tearing down the way life had been done before. And it was literally a new life in the form of a new country. A new institution was being born. And so you can really see these patterns. It's like King Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. What has been will be again. What has always been, I forget exactly how he says it, but that's the idea. It's the idea of cycles. Everything continues through a cycle, and we are living through one of those cycles right now. We are at the end of a societal winter, And we're at the beginning of a brand new societal spring, and right smack in the middle of that, this transition window, it's about 4 to 6 years. This is the age of regenesis, when the old is dying and the new is being born, and you and I get to start planting these seeds for the next 30, 40, 50, 80 years to come. So what's really going on is this. We're going through a cycle. It's not really a revolution. I mean, it's got characteristics of a revolution, but it's a cycle that needed to happen, that was going to happen. Everything has built to this. Everything from the last 80 years has built to this time in history. And the great news is we are near the end. Now, I started tracking this stuff in 2011, 2012. At that point, we had just gotten through the catalyst, the beginning of this cycle, which was the financial crash of 2008 and 2009. And I'm going to be honest, I was terrified. When I first learned about this whole idea of a societal winter, societal fourth turning, I freaked out. And I was like, oh no, the next 20 years are going to be terrible. And if you step back and you look at it, you say, it really hasn't been that bad. Now, I'm not going to say it's been great, because it's been hard. I mean, there's been a lot of struggles we've had over the last 20 years. You look at things like COVID, you look at the economic crisis itself, you look at inflation. I mean, there's been a pretty fascinating destruction of our societal institutions over the last 15 years. But we lived through it. I mean, here we are. We made it, right? We're at the other side of it. And if you can really step back and be dissociated from the present pain, you realize that, man, it needed to happen. It needed to happen. We needed to have all those social structures dissolving. We needed to have all this, government inefficiency and government corruption. We needed to have it exposed. We needed to have this destruction of the old institutions. And here's the cool thing. As we get through the end of this, we're in a position where the new institutions that will establish the next 80 years are being born. And that's really the theme. That's the opportunity. The opportunity is that when we start creating the next 80 years is now. The next 80 years don't just magically happen as we get there. They happen as we, as leaders, step into our authority and say, you know what? I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to be a leader for such a time as this. It's like Napoleon Hill always said, every setback brings with it the seeds of the next opportunity. That's a brilliant way of saying it. It looks like it's a setback. It looks like COVID was a huge setback. It looks like the economic crisis of 2008 and 2009 was a huge setback. But as you look at that entire 10, 15, 20-year window, as we get through this whole season, as you look at it in its totality, it felt like a setback, but it brings with it the seeds of the next opportunity. And the next opportunity is what you and I have the opportunity to take advantage of, number one. And number two, it's what the future generations are going to look back and say, my gosh, if only I could have been alive then. If only I could go back to 2025 and start investing in the U.S. economy. If only I could go back to 2025 and start this business. Look where it could have been. Now, if you don't believe me, think back about the last institutions. If you were, let's go back to the 1990s. Maybe here in 2025, it's not as relevant, but in the 1990s, how many of us looked back and said, my goodness, wouldn't it have been great to go back to the 1940s and 50s and start building businesses then? We had these empire businesses, IBM, Xerox, all these companies that established the 20th century. They were all born during this era that was right after the World War II catalyst event, right? We came right through that, and industry, in corporate industry, specifically corporate structures, just took off like we've never seen before. The same thing with like higher education and healthcare. I mean, how many of you like to go back to 1950 and invest in healthcare, right? I mean, what bigger industry has evolved? Technology since the 1940s and 1950s. I mean, what bigger industries have evolved? And the answer is there is none. Of course, since the 1940s and 50s, what an incredible time to be investing. And what I'm saying is we're at another one of those moments. We're seeing those old institutions, many of those that I just mentioned. The corporation, as we've known it for the last 80 years, is about to die. The government structures as we've known it for the last 80 years is about to die. Healthcare as we've known it is going through a metamorphosis. They don't even know it yet. I've been forecasting it now for about 6 years, and they haven't even caught up yet. But I'm telling you, healthcare as a whole is about to go through a major transformation. Higher education is about to hit a brick wall and go through the same kind of depression that the music industry went through in the year 2000. And so we've got all these institutions that are about to meet this really rude awakening as this societal winter comes to a close and spring is here. And that's why I say this is such an incredible time to be alive. It's the age of regenesis. It's this time of seeding, this small 4 to 6 year window where we get to plant the seeds that will become the establishment of the future. The key concept I really want you to grasp is this idea that the old institutions are dying and new institutions are coming, or new institutions are being born. And I want you to realize that I'm not talking about a specific institution or a specific identity. We're not saying this specific corporation. I'm talking about the institution as a whole, the institution of higher education, the institution of healthcare. The way that we have done life becomes institutionalized, and it's those institutions that are going through a metamorphosis. So the key concept here is that there's a societal winter, and in winter, the old is dying off, which leaves us room for new things to be born. And these institutions defined our society for the last 80 to 100 years. They're the ones that are going through this winter and through this rebirth. Things like the traditional job, the traditional career, which used to be someone's identity. Well, that's going through a transition, and we're seeing the rise of the at-home entrepreneur. We're seeing the rise of the gig economy, where after COVID now, 1 in 3 people are not working a traditional job. They're working the gig economy. So the job space itself is evolving. We're looking at like higher education as an institution that is transitioning. I work in an industry of digital marketing where that entire industry changes about every 18 months. How can someone go into a higher education environment, get a marketing degree, and come out 4 years later if the entire industry has changed at least twice while they were getting their degree? It's impossible. Higher education has to evolve, and so far, that's an institution that hasn't evolved, but what we have seen a rise to is we've seen a rise to these online trade schools, if you will, self-paced online specialized learning that allows anybody access for a very affordable price to learn a discipline that it used to take years or even an entire career to learn. Things like traditional financial planning. The idea of going to a traditional financial planner and turning all your money over, that idea, because they've done so terrible with it, that idea is transitioning into individuals self-directing their investments. And we can talk all night about that one. Central banking, the Federal Reserve, it was an institution that was established in 1913. It came into its prominence in the last previous winter and the height of the Great Depression. And the Federal Reserve swooped in, and basically took over our economic system. That institution is falling away. That institution is crumbling as we speak, and it is being replaced by decentralized finance, DeFi, and cryptocurrency. And it's all happening so fast. It's been happening. The seeds have been being planted, but we're in the transition right now. This whole idea of a global corporation, or what I call corporate globalism, where you have one giant company and they go around the world and they basically tell the world how we're going to operate, and the corporation is the king. That's being replaced by small global communities that are being led by individual leaders. And so it's being organized in a social media environment around key figureheads that now establish and actually have way more power than even the old corporation used to have. So right now in 2025, we are at this peak. We're at the beginning of this key, pivotal, critical time in history where we are literally creating the future. And as I've said, 50 years from now, in 2075, people are going to look back and say, man, wouldn't it be incredible to be alive back then? And here's the cool thing. We are alive. We are that unique generation that can say, I was alive. Because we are right now. And we are truly alive during one of the greatest crossroads in world history. I want you to realize there's not just the fourth turning William Strauss and Neil Howe model that suggests this. There's other cycles. In fact, I've been a student of cycles for years. The first one that I want to reference is the Kondratiev or Kondratiev waves from Nicholas Kondratiev, who's a Russian economist who saw these 60 to 80 year cycles way back before Strauss and Howe were even born. And Nicholas Kondratiev got executed because Stalin hated his forecast. But what he said back in the 1940s is he said the United States is about to enter a prolonged season of economic growth. And Stalin had him executed because he hated the idea that capitalism was going to explode over the next 50 to 60 years. And of course, Kondratiev was right. Kondratiev waves are one form of the cycle that confirms it. Another are the Elliott wave cycles, named after Ralph Nelson Elliott. Now, this is a stock market theory, but in the Elliott wave cycles, we understand grand super cycles, and we understand these big wave cycles. And there's wave cycles that happen at different time frames. We've got a big one that's a 500-year cycle. We've got the 80 to 100-year cycle. We have smaller cycles within that. And the Elliott wave principle and the Elliott wave theory has been pointing to this time for a long time. Then you can get outside of the economic cycles and you look at like the Hindu yugas. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a spiritual cycle that actually calls for these transitions on a consistent cyclical basis. And those are all coalescing. They're all coming together right now. Carl Jung talked about psychological cycles. And so even inside the mindset and just the psychology of society, we have cycles. And then one of the most interesting one is the astrological cycles and the planetary alignments. And we've just gotten into this period of, I think it's retrograde, if I remember, and all these planets are aligning. You've heard people say, what if all the stars just align? Well, we're in that period where all these planets and all these stars are aligning, and even astrology. And it doesn't matter where you go, economic cycles, spiritual cycles, psychological cycles, astrology cycles, they all provide an overwhelming amount of evidence that 2024, the end of 2024, into about 2030, 2031, 2032, this is the window when we have the opportunity to start planting the seeds for the next 80 to 100 years. Just to keep an idea on the opportunity and what this represents, if you look at the cycle that ended with the Civil War and moved into the Gilded Era, the entire economy more than 10x'd over the next cycle. Okay, so if you look at the charts, I can't show you the charts because it's an audio podcast, but I have the charts that show it. And if you look at the charts, it's just basically, it's like a parabolic curve going straight up. And then you get into the post-World War II era, and it's another 25 to 30 times. And that parabolic curve looks even stronger. And it's so strong that it makes the Civil War period look like it was child's play. It looks like nothing. And then if you forecast that out, and you look at what this golden age, as Trump refers to it as the golden age, if you forecast that out, just sticking with the same cycles, the same prognosis, where we're going to be from now is so big economically that despite what you think of Trump, he's right. People are going to look at this and they're going to have so much prosperity. They're going to say, wow, how did we ever get to participate in that? And when I draw this out on a chart, and I had ChatGPT construct these charts for me, when you look at that and the current cycle that we're in, this golden age, everything from the Civil War all the way up to 2025 looks like nothing happened. It just looks like a blip. That's how big this next cycle is going to be, and it is absolutely extraordinary. So let me kind of wrap it up this way for this first part of the Age of Regenesis. Right now, there are more life-changing, money-making opportunities than you could do in 5 entire lifetimes. There is so much opportunity right now. There is no way to even conceive the amount of opportunities that are happening right now. I mean, I always think there's more opportunities than you could do in a lifetime, but right now it's 10x, it's 20x, 50x, the amount of opportunities that are available to us. The only person who can't find an opportunity right now is someone who's not looking. That's the only person. There are so many opportunities. We've got opportunities in the job space and in at-home entrepreneurship. We've got education opportunities. We've got diversified passive income and building your own empire. This is an entire new way of looking at personal finance that's not really that new, but it's new because it's going to become the norm. Stuff that people like Robert Kiyosaki have been talking about for 25 years is going to become the norm of how people structure their personal finances in the next cycle that we're getting into as we get into this new societal spring. We're looking at the destruction of the fiat currency that dominated the last 50 to 60 years. And we're looking at that old banking guard completely being replaced with crypto and DeFi, huge opportunities. We're looking at complete destruction of the media's empires, and all these new online communities are being born and emerging in social media, and it's a completely new age of media. And I could literally just talk for hours about this, which is why I can't do it all in one episode, because we can't. And so that's why there's a lot more episodes to come. What we're going to do moving forward is we're going to start dissecting some of these opportunities, and I'm going to bring on some guests, and we're going to interview them, and we're going to just talk about all the different opportunities that the Age of Regenesis is offering us. And if you want to break out, if you are an individual who says, I want to be an individual, but I need some mentoring, I need some coaching here, I need a new way of thinking, Think Rich Radio is setting the tone for that, because we're going to show you what it is that the top 1% is thinking about, how they look at the problems, how they look at the situations, and how they take advantage of the opportunities. And this is it. This is the age you've been waiting for. And that's why we're going to do the Age of Regenesis Summit coming up here in just a couple of months. So if you haven't subscribed, subscribe so you can get alerts for that. Go to my website over at jeremywhaley.com, or, follow links in the show notes or wherever, subscribe to the podcast so that you can get all the updates for the upcoming summit. All right. So here we are, folks. It's so cool. Here we are. Welcome to the Age of Regenesis. Follow, subscribe, and embrace the change. If you let it be scary, then guess what? It's going to be scary. But if you embrace it, if you will understand that this is truly the greatest time we could be alive, and that we have this chance to make our mark. It's our mark on the next 80 years of history. If you'll embrace that, you'll realize, wow, what an amazing opportunity. So welcome to the Age of Regenesis. Hey folks, thanks for listening. I hope you got a lot out of this episode. Of course, be sure to subscribe. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, everywhere you listen to podcasts, YouTube. We've got it all out there. Just kind of gets distributed throughout the whole universe when we put these out. So go subscribe, and we're releasing at least one, usually 2 episodes a week. You don't want to miss a single one of them. If you haven't been over to the website, check us out at thinkrickradio.com. Check me out over at jeremywhaley.com. And of course, thanks to our show sponsor, Trade Maestro, trademaestro.com. If you want to learn how to trade the financial markets during this incredible time, this Age of Regenesis, go over to trademaestro.com and check it out. Get signed up for some stuff, take some classes, and change your trading future today. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.